Hello and welcome to Paradigm Playbook, a podcast for entrepreneurs in the business of sports. Your hosts, Dave Kozak and Steve Cook, are business owners, successful entrepreneurs, sports enthusiasts, avid readers, and longtime friends. For years, they've read every business book on the market and built successful companies with what they've learned. This podcast will give you the critical takeaways in just 15 minutes a week. It's a quick and easy playbook for building a winning sports business. And now, here are your hosts, Dave and Steve.
We appreciate your feedback. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review. If not, we'd still love to hear from you so we can improve.
Hey, everybody, welcome back.
Morning, David.
Steve,
ready
how
for
are
a
you?
good one?
We are.
Let's go.
This
Let's
is
go.
Paradigm Playbook, the podcast. So last time we talked a lot about goal setting, and in talking about goal setting, we sort of got into the subject of planning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're very interested but separate, right? So you know, is it a chicken and the egg, cart before the horse? Which do you do first? How do you do it? So I think a natural progression here is to start talking about the planning process, and where the goal setting and then actually backing into the execution. Right?
And you can't get into any discussion on planning without quoting Mike Tyson, of course.
Yeah, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, so I think that's got to be part of your plan. It's like, how do you take a punch?
Yeah, I mean, you think about military operations, you think about airlines, you think, what's the contingency? What's a contingency plan, right? And the other thing I also really like in plans is redundancy,
Mm-hmm.
right? But without wasting time, redundancy, right? You don't want to just waste time. And so I think the biggest aha moment for me in my career to date reflects back on Mike Tyson, right? Which is, yeah, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So you can go through your goal setting. You can go through your execution planning, your strategic management planning, your operations planning, your process planning, and all of a sudden something can happen that throws that way off. And I don't think there's a clearer example of that than what we all dealt with in COVID, right? Think about it. You own a gym, you own a facility, you own an athletic complex, and all of a sudden you're told, nope, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Well, that's certainly a punch in the face at that time, right?
Yeah, I think you have to be able to, one, having a clarity of your plan going in that is company-wide. So we as entrepreneurs very often are very clear on where we're going and what we're doing, and not so clear in communicating it to the team and making sure that everybody's on the same page, so that when you go into a reactionary, a COVID type, pandemic situation, you start acting, the entrepreneur is the one who's thinking, here's the next plan. You start doing things, and you're not stopping to pull everybody along, to make sure everybody's in on the revised plan.
And one other thing that I think is critical prior to really getting into how you do this is the idea that, decision making is critical in planning, and no decision in its own right is a decision, right? So, meaning, particularly in the instance where you get punched in the face, you got to make decisions, and you got to go, right? You can't be crippled by it and make no decision on it and expect the outcome to be positive.
Yeah, so it's at that point that you have to make sure that your overarching goals, we talked about WIGs, wildly important goals, are where you go in an emergency. So that's what you have to focus on. So one, you need clarity. Two, you need to make sure that you're focusing on those overarching goals that will drive your company. So in the pandemic, it was about maintaining a clientele, about providing a service, continuation of service, those things. It wasn't about teaching a class or holding a meeting or those things that may have been part of your plan. We're going to hold weekly meetings. Well, boom, that's the easy thing to get rid of. And then you go to the overarching goal and say, okay, how are we communicating? And, boom, born is Zoom and, all these other ways of doing things. And the smart ones are the ones that reacted to that, adjusted their plans, and found some benefit somewhere in a tragedy.
Yeah. So there's another aspect that I think as business owners, the larger you get, the more complex the business, the more distorted clarity becomes, right? And I think it's not that you in your own right don't have clarity. It's that the entrepreneur has so many things that tie into it that you start to worry about too many things. And when you start to worry about too many things, you become focused on too much, and therefore you don't come back to that which matters, right? And Steve, your old quote is that which gets rewarded gets repeated, right? So all of a sudden, if you're not getting the reward for the number one A thing, but you're seeing progress in all these other areas, you can become sort of distracted towards that end result. I'll give a personal example of this. We went through the EOS model, created our scorecard, and we found it, virtually impossible to get down to the limited number of things that we should be tracking. You call them KPIs, key performance indicators. Some people call them key metrics, all these things, right? On the scorecard, you're supposed to pick out, really you want 3 things and that dictate overall business health. And because 3 things is easy to look at and manage, right? Our scorecard to this day probably still has 20 things on it, right? In going through my planning process this year, I've identified the 2 that matter. Everything else is a secondary indicator, not the primary indicator of business health. And so I'm rewriting the book on all of our businesses to these 2 things, right? And for our business, it is the amount of people that attend our events. And the secondary thing is the amount of people that click, point, and buy our direct-to-consumer services. And if those 2 things are happening at the rate they need to happen, which I'll talk about how we got to what the rate that needs to happen, everything else falls in line. But you could be worried about, hey, we got all these people. How quickly are we getting them through the process? How you start focusing on all these subsequent downline things that really don't matter.
But if you still have 20 metrics that you're not accurately communicating your top 2, the 2 drivers that are really driving the business, if you're not communicating that, then you've got, me or Niall or somebody else that's out there, thinking we're setting hell on fire. And it's like, we're not even in the right game.
And I think sometimes I sit in a meeting and I'll gripe and him and haw, and they're like, but we got these 47 people through the system in 3 months. That was the target. And I'm going, well, daggum, they did, but the number 1 indicator wasn't there. It should have been 75 people, right? And so through no fault of their own, that distraction can be real.
One of the things in planning and I always remember, so Brian Tracy, you go back and there's a lot of brilliant people that have written books recently, but go back to some of the older ones. There's some of the things that Brian Tracy said, have stuck with me for a long time. And he always talked about a plan or a goal without a deadline is a wish. And so the deadline becomes important, for you, before you get to it. So you have this target. So if you and I sit down to write a book and we say, this is great, we're going to collaborate on this book. In my mind, I'm going to complete a book in 90 days. And in your book, this is going to be wrapped up in 2 years. That neither will work because we're not aligned in what those deadlines are. The other great thing about a deadline is, a deadline missed is the best indicator you can have because it's that exact time where you have to set a new deadline.
Yeah.
So it's not bad that it's missed. It's bad that if you missing it,
Well, and I think another thing that we get into in planning is the analysis paralysis. And, the quote I think is most impactful there is General George Patton, who said a good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan executed tomorrow. We'll spend a lot of time trying to get to that perfect plan. And reality is you had it 80%. And you could have done it last week or last month, and you delay until you believe it's perfect. And if you couple that with the Mike Tyson version of everybody has a plan to get punched in the face, you're going to get punched in the face. It's going to happen. So get the plan where it's mobile and movable and proceed, right?
I think another thing, and I'm going to stick on the, missed deadlines or things that we don't accomplish. As an entrepreneur, a business owner, you tend to start evaluating everybody within the system. And although you may not do it out loud, but you start placing blame on why this failed. They didn't do that. You didn't do this. And really it starts with what should I have done differently? And if you take that internal approach to it and say, what should I have done differently that maybe have given us a different outcome, I think that's where you start the evaluation to reset the next deadline and then get everybody aligned on where we're going with it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk the how, right? How do you plan, right? What do you have right? So Steve, we talked last time and you said, all right, I like to get a 30-day head start. So you like to get a 30-day head start on your goals. Your goals are established and then you have to put the plan in place.
Mm-hmm.
How does that process sort of come together?
So it's got to be habitual, but you have to So Niall, find a book for me called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. I think it's a Covey book. Okay. Is it? I can't remember.
It sounds like a Covey title.
But
thank you for listening. Visit ParadigmPlaybook.com to discover how we can support you and your business.
So, and I'm going to miss a couple of the 4, but number 1 is focus. So as entrepreneurs, we come up with new ideas all the time. We're running a small business and you always think, well, I'm running, we'll go back to gymnastics because it's my world. And we say, it's like the kids in this business, in this discipline need to learn some dance. So I'm going to start a dance. And all of a sudden you're focused on this dance and you've lost your focus, which was, your key metric that you want was increasing the number, increasing membership. So that's your goal. But now instead you're focused on trying to teach more disciplines to the same people. So you've lost your focus. So focus, I would say, is number 1. And then number 2, which ties right to it, is, act on the lead processes that will drive that metric that, if you're doing 1 or 2 or 3, whatever you're doing in your business, what is the lead metric? And there's 4 ways to measure your success, but you have to focus on the one that's the lead, the one that's going to, if you want to go from 49 customers to 75, then maybe your lead focus there has to be prospecting and you're not getting the prospecting. Or, if it's total people attending events, instead of teaching more at the event, maybe you need to run more events, or maybe you need to send more invitations, so you have to figure out where you're going with it. I'm trying to think of the other 2.
Actually have them here, Steve.
Okay, give me the last 2. Did I get the first 2 right?
Got them correct. So the third one is create a cadence.
Okay, that's the habitual part.
Yeah, that's the 4th one. Sorry. The 3rd one is keep a compelling.
Okay, that's where so we already hit them. So that's what you were saying, that a scoreboard to do that. And I think, we create KPIs and we do it in a group setting and we create KPIs. And sometimes the most important thing to the KPI is that it's achievable. And maybe that shouldn't be where we are. It should be what's going to have the biggest effect rather than what do we have the best chance of achieving.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to get more customers and your whole thing is clients, and you know that if you get 20 people to an event, you're going to pick up 4 clients, then where your concentration, you have to go to getting more than 20 people to an event or running another event with 20 people or wherever it is. You've got to get that, you're not getting to the first presentation.
Yeah. So I think there's a myth here that needs to be broken, which is you set the goals, then you do the plan, then you execute the plan. I think goal setting and planning are a organic and mutual process that you have to run sort of simultaneously. And while you're doing that, you're sort of brainstorming the execution of those. And so it's all sort of happening at the same time, right? It's not, you don't just get to go into a goal setting meeting and then go, okay, here's the plan to hit the goal. And then, okay, here's what we have to execute to do it. I think you have to look at the goal. You have to measure it against reality. Then you have to come back and say, okay, if that's really the goal, how would we plan to get there? How are we going to execute it? When are we going to start it? When are we going to do that? It's a full blown sort of cluster of things that you have to take into consideration as you're creating it. You don't just step in and go like, I'll give you an example. I want 100 new clients. Well, in your entire history, you've never brought on 100 new clients, and you just set a mark that is arguably unachievable. Your highest year to date has been 20, and you're going to 5x it. How are you going to 5x it? And then you got to go taper it and say, okay, well, let's just go for a 100% lift or a 50% increase. If I do 50%, where does that put the outcome? And then you look at the numbers on the backside, and then you come back and say, okay, that seems more reasonable, executable. Now to plan to get there, I'm going to double everything I did. Okay, so if I double everything I did, what's the spend on it? And so you're running this process simultaneously, and you have to have your own mental checks and balances as a business owner to what is tangible and realistic, and what does it take to get there, and then the who of it's huge too. Right? If you're at max capacity and you're the one that's done all the recruiting into your business, whether it's new clients, new customers, whether it's selling new widgets, whatever it may be, if you've done all that, who is in the seat that can take on the workload that would be a doubling of that? And that's where you start to get into the strategic part of executing the plan, right? So I think a lot of people set whimsical goals, right? They don't go through the SMART goal process. And in going through the SMART goal process, I think you have to do the planning simultaneously.
So I want to have you look at it in one more way. And I get that, unrealistic goals don't work. But if you set a goal to get 20 new clients a month, or, let's say that's it, and you achieve that month after month after month, and your team is starting to feel, well, this is pretty easy. So they're bringing effort down to meet a goal rather than a goal up to drive the effort. So I think that, there are two things. It's execution of a plan. So you have to have a plan, but the effort portion of it too is that has to be controlled, and it doesn't just happen. Everybody has people on their team that are going to come back to the level that's acceptable. And I think that's part of your plan. So, it's said that, entrepreneur's the guy that, jumps out of a plane and, sews a parachute on his way down.
Yeah.
So it's like that's going on all the time. But so I get that your plan has to be malleable and you're always changing it. But in both directions is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I 100%. Listen, if you are setting goals and sticking to them like they're the 10 commandments written in stone, you're missing the whole issue that Mike Tyson brings to the table in that quote. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? If you have a plan that is good for the business, good for you, good for the bottom line, it's good across the board, and you hit it quickly and more than once on a weekly or monthly basis, reset the target. Mm-hmm. Right? Hey, I've got this. I beat this level. I've achieved this mark. Let's go. Let's jack it. And you also have to have I think that's a cultural thing too, Steve. We're going back to some of our older conversations on business culture. But if you have a culture of business, which is, hey, I hit the goal, like you're asking, you asked me to do, and I did.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's culture, but I think we could go back to the discussion in one of our very early podcasts. We talked about business model canvas and, how it's, writing it in erasable marker on a whiteboard is better than having a, 100-page book that you never read again.
Yeah. So
if we go back and look at the 7 components of this business model canvas, it's in there, and it's in there, in pencil or in chalk, so it can be changed.
Yeah, without question. So we're gonna try and stick to our timetable today, so that it's at least a chewable bite-sized podcast. The couple of sort of summary points to me. I think in the way I operate, I'm constantly looking at the next time, right? So the next time I revisit this goal, this model, right, throughout the year, let's say, and I typically I'm a pretty year-oriented goal person, right? I usually go on the calendar year. If I get to June and I'm not happy with the result, disappointed, I'm already thinking forward to the next year. I'm already thinking about how I would do it differently. So be malleable in the planning. Don't be afraid to pivot. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But if it is broke or it's not running according to how you saw it going, don't be afraid to change, right? That's one of the beauties, I think, of being an entrepreneur is you're okay with change. You have become comfortable being uncomfortable, right? That is one of the keys I've noticed in every entrepreneur. They're okay taking the risk. They're okay leaping. They're okay making the jump until they get to a certain point, and then they're like very cautious of like, well, we've always done it this way, and it's been a good business. But I think that's the pinnacle. The downside of that mountain is, how are you selling? How are you closing? How are you transferring it? What are you doing? So that's the begin with the end in mind part of it.
And I'll close it out with saying, the key is transparency in, whether it's your business partners, and I'm not talking people that own your business, but your banker, lawyer, all your partners in your business, and your partners that are working in your business, and your clientele. You have to be transparent about what you're doing and what your goal is and what your plan is. So, yeah.
And to that same point, like transparency is it is certainly a learned skill. Mm-hmm. It is not something that just naturally, like you as a business owner at times just expect. And I used to talk with my current business partners, and say that, they'd be disappointed in somebody's performance or somebody's production or somebody's discipline to a particular thing. And I'd be like, well, you have to teach them what it is you expect. You can't just say, do this, and then you get it back, and it's not in the manner or order that you get it back in, whether it's showing up to a meeting, whether it's not whether it's an actual thing you do. It's like, hey, I expect it to be done this way. So the more transparent, the more clarity you can give at the front, the less disappointment you have on the backside. And I think that's part of that transparency thing as well. So that's just food for thought, that you kind of hit a nerve with me on that one.
Okay. So, in closing out today, why don't we make a plan to go back and readdress the business model canvas and to see how all the components in there and how all those, the change takes place.
I think another one in close proximity is the transparency conversation, like getting deeper on that and the how of that. And that kind of, leader vision culture piece that the transparency creates. So everybody, I know we threw a lot at you. We didn't dig real deep into how you plan. I think that's got to be individual to the business, but I think we gave you good parameters to think about, sort of like the guardrails of planning and goal setting in these last 2 episodes. So I hope you liked it. Please subscribe, like, share our podcast to anyone that's an entrepreneur or thinking about being an entrepreneur. I think this is just great information. I wish I had when I started.
And everyone, please start looking for our Playmaker episodes that are starting to come out now. So And if you're interested, and if you are a playmaker in the sports business and want to be interviewed, go to our website and you can see how you can apply to do that.
All right, everybody. That's
Make it a great day.
Hey, if you're enjoying Paradigm Playbook podcast, please share and tag us on social media. Your support is greatly appreciated.